Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Fact Sheet live on ETV, live on Facebook and live on NISIM 100.1 and 95.9. I know for the very new viewers of the show, because of the African Cup of Nations, it's been a challenge for us to bring you the discussions we've been having over the period. But it's exciting to be back here again this evening to bring you the facts and nothing but the facts. And at the end of the day, we all carry something along. But I think it will be appropriate for us to wish all of you a happy New Year, especially as we have entered into a brand new day in the month of February 2022. Afishapa to everybody. Now, as we welcome you to the first edition of the show, there's a very important conversation to be had. That has to do with one which has been dominating the media space since the beginning of the year. I know. It has to do with the payment of the e-levy, to pay or not to pay, to pass or not to pass. Several views have been expressed about the e-levy. But other school of thoughts are also propounding new ways that they believe can help deal with the issues that government has to face now. We all know when it comes to the borrowing space for government, it hasn't got, considering our debt to GDP at the moment, which is around 83 point something. I know government issued a statement trying to let us know the situation in terms of the reports that we are getting from the IMF and the other institutions. We all know the Fitch ratings, which came just a few weeks ago, all to the effect that the Ghanaian economy was not doing too well. Imagine these ratings and the impact it has on us if we decide to go to the, bond market to go and look for money. That becomes a bit of a problem for us, considering the IMF's own description of our economy. That is a high-risk country. Therefore, what options do we have apart from the e-levy that government is hoping to utilize to raise revenue internally to be able to meet its targets in terms of its expenditure or policy programs? One, some propose that if you don't have the money, why not cut down on your expenditure plan? Why not cut down on your projects you want to embark on? That's what some others are saying. The government must cut down on its expenditure plan for the year if indeed it feels that it hasn't got the capacity to meet them. There are those who also hold the view then why has it become so difficult for the government to go to the IMF? Why is government not interested in going to the IMF? It's the option that's on the table that a lot of economists and financial analysts are discussing today in the media space. The IMF, an option for Ghana to go or not an option. There are those who raise the issue that there's a possibility for us to go to the IMF, get some money, in order for government to have its breathing space to do its structural programs and then to invest in the economy for it to get a boost that it's looking for. And it would get a very good interest rate and a long tenure in terms of repayment for this loan it might be getting from the IMF. Some make the case that, look, already government has gone to the IMF for an SDR facility of over $1 billion. How about that? If government resorted to the IMF for support when it comes to the SDR and that $1 billion we got from the IMF. Some allocations have been made towards African countries in terms of our ability to crawl out of our situation we are in now. And so we are trying to understand why that conversation about the IMF is so difficult to be had with government when it comes to the dire situation we are in today. We ask, the IMF, who really are they? People talk about the conditionalities of the IMF and why they are afraid, because it would obviously mean austerity measures would have to be taken. But what do they mean, these austerity measures? Are we not already taking them as a nation? These are the areas we'll try to understand tonight on Fact Sheet as we get the bigger picture as to what going to the IMF would mean for us if it's a proposal from some school of thought that Ghana must look in the direction of the IMF. My name is Samuel Ishen, and I welcome you to tonight's edition of Fact Sheet. When we're back, I'll share with you our history with the IMF and why we should not be afraid or should be afraid to go back to the IMF. Do kindly stay with us. Be right back. And you're welcome back to the conversation live on ETV. This is Fact Sheet. It's live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow the conversation with the handle ETV Ghana and share your thoughts with us on the show tonight. We'll be glad to read your comments when they do get to us. But quickly, let me share with you some bit of a history of our relationship with the IMF, and it will set the tone for us to begin the conversation. Now, this is information that's on the IMF's own website, and so it tells us the kind of arrangements we've had with them. In 1966, Ghana went to the IMF, and this was with a standby agreement facility which we had with them. Similar agreements arrangements went on from 1966 until 1987, where the structural adjustment facility commitment also came in around 1987. Now, this expired around 1988. Immediately after that, we went into another arrangement with the IMF from 1988, which was the extended credit facility, up until 2019, which it ended, which had been entered into by the NDC administration from 2015 until 2019. The NPP actually extended it to 2019 from 2018 to 2019. And if you look at all these arrangements, it tells you that Ghana over the years has had some, arrangements with the IMF in terms of its ability to stabilize its economy and then to meet its targets in terms of its macro economic plans and then the micro as well. And so tonight, to help me do justice to the conversation, to have an understanding and appreciation of the issues as to why people entertain fears when it comes to going to the IMF, the popular term that comes up is austerity measures. Why do people entertain these fears when we have that history with the IMF? Tonight, Mr. Emmanuel Amwadakwa is here with me. He's economist and partner at CCAT Global. Professor Lord Mensah would also be joining us on the line. He's Associate Professor, Department of Finance, University of Ghana Business School, to share his thoughts with us on the show this evening. Ima, good evening and welcome to the discussion.
Good evening. Thank you, Sean, for having me. I'm excited to be the first guest for this year.
I'm excited to have you as well. I'm excited to, and I've been following your exploits, on social media with respect to your consultancy business.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So to set the tone for our conversation, let's try and have an idea what the IMF stands for. When we mention the IMF, what do they stand for?
So IMF, that's the abbreviation, but the full meaning is International Monetary Fund, and that was established in 1944, and it came out of a conference called the Bretton Woods Conference. After the Second World War, which spanned from 1939 to 1945, the world had to put itself together, and as part of the monetary side, as establishing United Nations as the mother body to look at peace and stability, the Bretton Woods institutions, i.e. the World Bank and the IMF, were established after the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference. The core mandate then for World Bank was to look at reconstruction after the World War, and then for the IMF to look at global cooperation in terms of the monetary side, to look at how best countries can also maintain their balance of payments, exchange rate regime and all that. And so that has been the core, but the institution has evolved over the years. Permit me to list three key functions of the IMF. The IMF has about 189 member states. So the three key functions of the IMF now is one, they provide what we call surveillance. And surveillance is according to Article 4 arrangement. Article 4 arrangement means that they come to member states to take financial and economic data and for you to discuss. And so they will advise you that maybe your budget deficit is going on, it's too high, your public debt is too high, maybe you should put a freeze on your public sector employment because the wage bill is too high. So that is one, the surveillance. Number two is on technical assistance. Because of the IMF's role in so many countries, they've gained that level of experience in consulting for government all over the world. And so if you want to put up a policy in terms of drafting a legislation on financial side, they will help you. And Ghana, in the last IMF program we went to, they helped us to draft the Public Financial Management Act, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Deposit Taking Act, and all that. These are all fallout of legal regimes that came out of the last Extended Credit Facility program. And then the last thing which scares people is a funded program, whereby it will come with conditionalities. And so for the last one, which extended between 2015 and 2019, we call it the Extended Credit Facility. And so it came with conditionalities, among which we had to put a freeze on public sector employment. There are some tax hikes and all that. And so when you mentioned the IMF, and also because of our history in 1983, whereby we had to go for a structural adjustment program, the fallout of the program wasn't too pleasant. And so a lot of Ghanaians, when they hear the IMF, they refer to it as a monster institution, and because of the austerity measures that the fund might recommend to government to implement, then they get scared of the IMF. But the IMF, as I have mentioned, has three key functions: surveillance, technical assistance, and then funded program. So
there's a possibility the first two options, Ghana could opt for that in terms of the surveillance and then the technical assistance, which they have been providing already per the Article 4, which recently the 2021 one they provided
every year they do that.
Now I want to understand, when COVID-19 hit us, the special drawing rights that they gave us $1 billion. Why wasn't a concern raised about the same institution giving us that money at a time when we're in crisis?
It depends on the tenant of that facility. So we call that one Rapid Credit Facility. And that one came as a result of the exigencies of the matter. COVID-19 has hit. Revenues have been plummeting. Expenditures have been going high. Governments have had a balloon budget deficit coupled with high public debt. And so the IMF had to make some funds available for member states to access so that they will be able to show up their revenues, number one, to also support balance of payment. And so that was what we call the Rapid Credit Facility. It has a grace period of 5.5 years. Then you are going to pay. So it's also a loan. You are going to pay. But the terms are quite favorable, and the rates are quite favorable as compared to commercial loans. But it didn't come with conditionalities. But for the Extended Credit Facility that I referred to, a total of $918 million, close to $1 billion, was disbursed over the period of 4 years. And it came with conditionalities. And for you to assess the funds, you have to go through reviews. So there were periodic reviews. So every 6 months or every 8 months, depending on the target they set for you. Let's say implement a Fiscal Responsibility Act, maybe have a Financial Deposit Taking Act. Once you're able to meet those criteria, then they will disburse the fund for you, and then you'll be able to embark on whatever you want to use the money for.
Now let's look at the theories that people are proposing, or the paths that they feel we can take as a nation. One is the e-levy, which government is pushing vehemently. Two has to do with government cutting down on its expenditure and then its policies and programs for the year 2022, so as to meet its revenue projected. The third one has to do with borrowing from outside. Are these two options not options that government can look at? The third one,
government has found itself in a very critical and crucial state. We currently have a very tight fiscal space. And so I quote the 2022 budget, 3 expenditure items. Number one expenditure item is interest payment. We have allocated about 37 billion, followed by compensation to government employees, 35 billion. Then grants to government units, about 26 billion. Then you have capital expenditure. Even if I pick the first 3, 37 plus 35 plus 26 is going into 100 billion. And our total revenue generation, we have projected to raise about 100 billion. And so government has a very tight fiscal space. Now, the available options will be to go and borrow. In the 2022 budget, total revenue is estimated at 100 billion, as against expenditure of 137 billion. you have a budget deficit of 37 billion, which has to be financed, whether domestically or externally. What we have seen now is that the external factors and going for an external loan, especially commercial loan, is going to be very difficult. And we look at the current ratings by Fitch and raising concerns about how we'll be able to amortize those debts. And so it's become very difficult for government. That is why government is found in a very between the rock and the hard place to look at policy options going into the future.
Now, let me just quickly jump to the Article 4, the recent one which the IMF had with government, and some few things that they mentioned in there that could cause or that could have caused the experience we are having. Now, they say on the matter of growth that growth slowed from 6.5% in 2019 to 0.4% in 2020 due to lower mining production and the impact of COVID-19 restrictions, equivalent to an income per capita decline of 1.7%. Now, my mind went there to the point about the lower mining production. That if there's been a decline in terms of the revenue we are getting from mining, should we not be paying attention to that sector? The extractive sector. If the IMF tells us that it's not just COVID-19 that is causing us the harm, but the mining sector that we have slowed down on is causing that. Should we not be looking there instead of the e-levy?
We should, but if you look at the three major exports for our country, we have gold, we have crude oil, and then cocoa. And so when there is a decline in the market and in the prices of these goods, we are going to be affected. And so you remember in 2014, one of the reasons why we faced that difficulty was that crude oil price, the minister had made projections of about above $80 per barrel, $80 per barrel, but it went down even below $40 or $30 a barrel. And so there was huge revenue shortfall. Same as what happened last in 2021 and even in 2020. Now, government had made projections, revenue projections, but because of the advent of COVID, your revenues are going down. At the same time, you have to bear some unexpected expenditure. You have to import drugs, vaccines, you have to import PPEs, you have to pay people, health workers. These were unintended. And so according to government had to spend in excess of 14 billion. At the same time, revenues had to be short by about 11 billion. And so budget deficit, it's in double digits now as we speak as a country. But even with our own fiscal laws, we are saying that we should be able to do less than 5% to GDP. But now the law has been suspended because of the exigencies of COVID-19 and its impact. And so, yes, we should be concerned about the low volumes of gold prices, but we should also be minded that we are price takers in all these things, gold, cocoa, and crude oil. Ghana, as a nation, does not determine the price at which it should be sold on the international market. It is determined by the forces of demand and supply and by some big powers. And so what we should be concerned about, for example, in cocoa sector, is that instead of exporting raw beans, why don't you add value to it? And I use cocoa as an example again. Between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, we are exporting in excess of 60-70% of raw beans. The value of chocolate is about more than 140 billion, we are told. We are getting, as a country, even less than $6 billion. It means that if we're able to go up-notch the value chain, adding value to cocoa, then we'll be able to raise some more money. The same applies to gold. How many smelters, how many, aluminum gold refineries do we even have to add value before we export? So those are very fundamental issues that our economy has failed to resolve. You mentioned in the example of the 1966 standby agreement. It might shock you to note that what we presented as our problems has not really changed as an economy. It is largely import dependent, largely budget deficits are going high, public debt going high, we are not raising a lot of revenue, expenditure is going high. These are critical problems that our economy has faced over the years, but we've not been able to resolve it. And hence, once after you exit a program, you have to go for another program. And let me also point that between 1957, when Ghana joined the IMF, till now, We have gone for 16 IMF bailout programs. 16 bailout programs. Ghana will be 65 this year. So on average, every 4 years, we are going for a funded program. It means that there is a critical issue about our economy that relates to the structure of the economy. The economy is not producing a lot of jobs. The economy is import dependent. The economy, we are not raising a lot of revenue. At the same time, illicit financial flow, corruption, we have not been able to resolve these issues. And so you go for a bailout program in the space of about, on average, as I have quoted, about 4 years. Then you go for a funded program. Now we are back at having a discussion. My thesis at grad school, I assessed Ghana's performance on an IMF program, 2015 to 2017. And I can read to you the challenges we sent to the IMF to resolve. And those are the current challenges we are facing now. And so it tells you that we have not, as a country, resolved the fundamental economic structural problems as a country.
Interesting point. But back to the substantive matter on our table.
Yeah.
The austerity measures that everybody dreads, that everybody is afraid of, are they not obvious to us? For instance, government tells us that the private sector is the engine of growth. And therefore, if indeed the government had done so much, by now, the issue about people on government's payroll in terms of the public sector should not be a concern for us, considering how much we spend on them. And so if the private sector was doing that well, that should not be an issue. If the IMF decides that we are putting a restriction on employment into the public sector. Number two has to do with government expenditure. If government prioritizes its expenditure, we wouldn't have so much concern when it comes to government expenditure. The third one that I may add has to do with the taxes. Taxes are being introduced as we're speaking about the e-levy. And so, even without the IMF, these are obvious things that we should know to do. And so, what makes it difficult for us to go to the IMF to get some money and still
But what also makes it difficult for government to implement the solutions that they know? So it tells you that government knows the problems that they have. And it's about commitment to solve the problem. But I always say that the elephant in the room in Ghana in terms of economic management is politics. And I'll give you an example. Why would government want to implement free senior high school policy? At the same time, they know that there's a drain on the public purse. Maybe we should be able to find another source of, funding such a policy, or be doing a targeted policy instead of, a wholesale. But it's because of a political decision. I have promised that when I come to power, I'm going to deliver free senior high school. So no matter what, I have to deliver. And this is the challenge that we are facing now. And so I believe that we know our problem, we know our solution. When Honorable Setekwe was Minister for Finance, when they were going to the IMF, they presented what we call the homegrown solution. So it means that they know the problems that they were facing. But the ability to solve the problems, we knew at the time that the financial sector was on the brink of collapse. According to a Bank of Ghana report in 2015, Asset Quality Review, it showed that a lot of banks were insolvent, a lot of banks had challenges with their books. And so the IMF program will have to say that implement what we call the Deposit Taking Act. Do an amendment of the Bank of Ghana Act to strengthen you. Hence, we saw the reforms we made in the banking sector, whereby some banks had to go because they were not doing it. But they knew the problem.
But did it achieve anything at all? Considering we have had this conversation before, where today the Monetary Policy Committee, we are being told they stayed the rate at 14.5. They are staying it at 14.5. Now it's gone as low as 13.5. And yet it hasn't reflected in the amount of interest that businessmen would be paying at the banks if they went for loans. And this has been going on for years, from 2017 until now.
So it tells you that policy in itself will not be able to achieve its objectives if government or the regulator would not follow up with some policies. And so Bank of Ghana had to, the last two MPC meeting was around 13.5%. But let's look at the impact of that 13.5 on lending rate. We couldn't see that much drastic downward reduction in lending rate in Ghana. It means that there are other problems that we have to solve. And part of the problem is government. Non-performing loans. Why are we still having a lot of non-performing loans on the books of banks? Again, why is it that some banks are also not offering high quality credit to customers, whether corporate or individuals? And the report will show you, the Capital Bank report shows us that about 65% of loans went to board members and all that. So it shows you that as a regulator, you have a role to play in bringing sanity into the sector. That is why, as part of the report of Bank of Ghana, it pointed to its own self, the banking supervision department, that they also part of the problem that we face for us to go through the financial sector cleanup. And so I always say that as a country, we know our problems, but the political will to solve our problems, that is what is very difficult.
But is that not where, for instance, when it comes to the banking sector and the fact that government realizes that regardless of the monetary policy rate coming down to as low as 13.5, it's not translated into the banking sector being liquid enough to give money to businesses to do their businesses. And so they go to their EIB and they raise on 170 billion euros, which they say now they are going to disburse to categories of businesses so as to access cheap loans to propel growth in the economy.
But one of the reasons why lending rates are also going down is because of government. Because government is also on the market competing with the private sector. So if the private sector man is coming to the bank to borrow at maybe 12.5%, government is also doing that at the same rate. But the bank being prudent means that knows that government will never default on its credit. And so will feel comfortably lending to government. And we have read successive Bank of Ghana report that shows that banks are lending to government at the expense of the private sector. One reason being that government's appetite for borrowing is too high. And it might interest you to know that in 2021, our even domestic borrowing, we exceeded domestic borrowing. What it means is that we are actively in the market competing with the private sector for the same credit. And so lending rates will not go down as we expected. And so government is also part of the problem.
All right. I'll come back to you on the issue of what we invest in. All these monies we are talking about, what we invest them in. Let me go to the phone lines and speak to Professor Lord Mensah as well and invite him into the conversation. Prof, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. And, good evening.
Hello, good evening, Prof.
Good evening. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you, sir. It's good to have you on the show tonight, sir.
Thank you.
Now, we are having a conversation about whether government must be considering going to the IMF for assistance in terms of the restructuring of our economy. As an economist and a financial aspect, you think that's a path or a conversation we should be having?
Well, from where I sit, it's not necessary to go to IMF.
Okay.
I mean, it's not something that I will encourage. In a sense that we went to IMF some time ago, and IMF came with certain financial discipline to keep us on track. And some of them was to keep our budget deficit between that 5% of our GDP. And at the same time, the pre-financing that government takes from the Bank of Ghana should be reduced to about 5% of expected revenue in the first quarter of the year. So all these things are things to, keep the country in a strong financial footing to ensure that we don't derail our financial standards. Now, as a country, we're in a hurry for IMF to exit because the restrictions they came with As a result of the indiscipline that we find ourselves in, we cannot keep it going. Well, we knew very well that some governments lost elections out of this. And another government took over, and they were in a rush to exit IMF. Now, as of the time where IMF was exiting the country, our budget deficit was around almost at the 5% that, they were insisting that we keep our budget deficit to. The reason why I'm insisting on budget deficit is that, it's within the budget deficit that the borrowing comes up. And if you create a huge deficit, you must finance it. And as a result of that, you may have to go to the Eurobond market and in some cases borrow from the local market, which we know, the consequence of it, up to a certain threshold, you may be crowding out, the private sector growth and all this. We've debated in that direction way, way long ago. Now, the question is, should we go to IMF or not? I would say it's not necessary, because if you are to play by the numbers that we have in the current budget, I believe that government overestimated our expenditure, and then so doing overestimated our, revenue. Government was bold enough to indicate that our revenue increase will go by about 30 billion. The same way they were bold enough to indicate that our expenditure will also grow by about 35 billion and over. Now, if you relate this to, the happenings on the ground, you clearly see that government had some confidence in the economy. And some of them was, to tax the ye levy, the ye platforms. And that doesn't seem to be working as a result of hung parliament and all this. Now, if you are to have this, our budget in front of you, you clearly see that some items have been overbloated at the expenditure side. Because if you take, for instance, interest payment, you know very well that now your interest that you're supposed to pay at the end of the year is of this quantum. So that one, it is difficult to underestimate or overestimate. Now, when you take salary payment, you know very well that as a government, at the end of the year, getting into the new year, you're going to do salary adjustments across all workers about maybe 7%. So the increase in salaries and emoluments, you know very well. And your arrears payment too, you know very well. So those ones, you don't have control over. So the estimation of those items at the expenditure side were spot on. That one, you would not, get difference in, overestimation or underestimation that much. However, let's come to, I don't want to touch on capital expenditure because already the country yearns for it. People are asking for their roads. People are asking for, the certain amenities to make their life comfortable. But there is an item there called others, if you look on the budget. That other item, which is non-earmarked item, which is at the discretion of the policymaker, what to spend in there. Last year, we budgeted around 7 billion for that. And this year alone, we are budgeting around 10 billion. Then you ask yourself, an increase of about, let's say, 35%. Now, if you have a country that is crying for, funds, avenues to raise money, you will not hit and increase I will call that miscellaneous. Increase your miscellaneous by that margin, because that is non-earmarked fund. Now, there's another item at the expenditure side, which is called grant to government agencies. I don't know whether I got the nomenclature right or not. Now, if you look at this grant to state institutions, last year it was around 16 billion, and this year alone it was around 15 billion. This year alone we budgeted for about 26 billion, a whooping cough about 11 million extra. Then you ask yourself, within last year and this year, that is about more than 50% increase. So you ask yourself, what is happening at those institutions that government grant to them will be increased by that margin? And these items are items that government has control over in terms of managing them, in terms of cutting the cost in that direction. So for me, if we really look into the budget very well, and probably we are not able to get the e-levy through, we shouldn't go to IMF. We have to revisit the budget and cut some areas within it. Those essential ones that are needed, let's keep them going. But the ones that we don't need them, let's revisit them.
It's interesting. You speak as if, you know, we don't know about political party manifestos. We don't know about government machinery and government projects that they do, and the issues to do with prioritization that we've been speaking about. The only times we have governments sticking to these are when they have an IMF program and they have to stick to fiscal discipline. Can government be disciplined enough with these things you're talking about?
Oh, yes, it takes commitment. A situation where you really want to keep the country going without going to IMF. Because going to IMF the second time, and the signal you're going to give them is that you cannot manage on your own. So when they come in, the restrictions and the conditions they will give the country, I don't think Ghana can cope with it as we speak now. Now, this is a country that is already crying of unemployment situation. Now, when IMF comes in, you know what they're going to tell you? They will tell you that reduce some of the expenditures. And those things that the IMF normally tackles are the ones that government hasn't got control over, like, you know, compensations and all those emoluments that will make the people feel good. So we have to be careful. It's not something that we should be proud of and say that go to IMF and go and learn some lessons. Well, their presence will, you know, keep our leaders in check. But trust me, the economic consequence of it will not help us at all. As a country, we cannot always portray to IMF that we can't manage on our own. We should be able to prove to them that when things are difficult, they're able to cut down expenditure, and then we should be able to survive with it.
It's interesting your position, because from 2017, 2018, 2019, we have all been raising concerns about our debt portfolio. We have all been raising concerns about where our money is going for. And so if we would have seen some discipline, it would have been way back that we would have seen that discipline that would not land us here, even if COVID-19 had not hit us.
Well, COVID, sometimes I don't want to blame our problems on COVID. Yes, because we started overspending before the COVID. Let me give you a signal. Immediately we exited the IMF. Our first budget after exiting IMF, the deficit we're reading was around 11% to GDP. Now, what do you think will happen within 11% to GDP? You must finance it, and definitely you are going to borrow. So it has to do with financial industry.
All right. We'll go for a short break. When we come back, two questions, one to you, Ima, and then one to Prof, and then we will end the conversation. And that would be, where do we spend our money? Because if we're spending the money in something that regenerates revenue, we'll be able to pay off these debts, and then we'll all have peace of mind. We'll be right back. And you're welcome back to Fact Sheet on ETV. We have less than 8 minutes. Now, I'll give you 3 minutes of that to try to make sense of where all the money goes to, especially we're planting for food and jobs. One district, one factory, one village, one dam. Why are we here?
These are, you just mentioned flagship programs, and so this government had some flagship programs that they make disbursement every year. and you should be able to look at the benefits you are going to get from those flagship programs. And I make reference to free senior high school. You are saying that we are doing a wholesale free senior high school. Maybe it's about time you consider looking at how best we can do component-based, planting for food and jobs. How much of effort has it reduced our import bill? As a country, we are spending a lot of money, in excess of $1 billion, importing food. And so how much has this program led to?
But if we say we are taking away the benchmark value, you people say, no, don't touch it.
No, in public policy, what we should realize is that every public policy has advantages or disadvantages. So you implement a benchmark policy. At the same time, you have an industrialization agenda. And what benchmark will do is that prices of goods that are imported will become cheaper as compared to locally produced goods, or for some of the goods, not all of the goods. And so you kick people who are producing locally out of business. And that is why we've not seen the effect of what has been the critical analysis on benchmark values on the revenue streams of Ghana. It tells you that maybe we should have considered or do a broad stakeholder consultation to get to which of the policy options to choose. Again, I believe that it's about time you look at cutting some of the expenditure, especially on the recurrent expenditure. Prof mentioned about other expenditure. I'm looking at it, Appendix 3C in the 2022 budget. These are some of the things that if they are not earmarked, it goes and then we don't know what it's used for. At the same time, this government, you are desperate in need of money. I believe that it's about time that we become fiscally disciplined on our own. If you go for a funded program, they are going to tell you to implement the solutions that you know you should implement. And so if you know your wage bill is going high, you know that it's going high. If you know that some other expenditures, maybe it's not important, we have to look at, you know that it's very high, so you have to look at it. You also know that the people who are paying tax, they are just a small microcosm of the population. And so how do you expand the tax base? These are the difficult things that government must be committed to doing. Other than that, going for a funded program, you will not solve the problem. And as I've mentioned to you, from 1966 when we went for the standby agreement, if you look at the prospectus for the ended extended credit facility between 2015 and 2019, the challenges have not, we've not been able to resolve the challenges. And I can read to you the main pillars of the just exited program. Number one, to achieve sizable and front-loaded fiscal adjustment. We know to restore debt sustainability. We know our public debt is going high. To contain expenditures through wage restraints and limited net hiring. We know. To embark on structural reforms to strengthen public finances. We know. To restore the effectiveness of inflation targeting framework. We know. To safeguard social and other priority spending. We know. And so to go for an IMF or not to go to an IMF, we know our problems as a country. We should be able to resolve our problems. There will be no need for a funded program whereby you are going to implement austerity measures. And at the end of the day, you should also look at 2024. Once the austerity measures come in and they bite hard, you should know that there's a government you want to continue. They will vote you out of power. That is why they should be committed to solving the problems now, so that they will be able to provide, a better economy for them and then for the future of our economy.
Let me give the final bite to Prof. Prof, if you're with us, I was asking, is it that we have not been utilizing our revenues well? That's why we are where we are in terms of, spending on current expenditure, spending on loans, spending on, people employed within the public sector. Is there a clever way of handling this going forward? All right, it looks like Prof's line, maybe it might have dropped. So we'll take advantage and then use that, to look at tomorrow, as in where we find ourselves now. The other very important question is, let's say the E levy is going to generate some 7 billion this year.
What you have a budget deficit of 37 billion.
Yeah.
You want to raise e-levy of about 7 billion. That is a drop in the ocean. I think maybe government knows something that we don't know. We do not know, because 7 billion, as against the impact on the digital economy, we should be able to. Now the conversation should be about the impact on the digital economy, and then how you'll be able to include people in the financial space, either than revenue projection. And so I believe that 7 billion, it's not going to be the magic figure. The magic figure, if you want to get it, is for you to cut down on unnecessary expenditure and then raise a lot of revenue. It is difficult to do it, but we should start from somewhere.
The point you make about the digitalization drive or agenda, the Ministry of Finance makes us to understand that per their projections and simulations, some 24% of Ghanaians are likely to go off the platform as a result of the implementation of this e-levy. Should we be concerned?
Yeah, so the volumes will drop. Once the volumes drop, the projected revenue you'll not be able to get. And at the same time, the mess you would have caused in the digital space will be too huge. And that is why I believe that we should be able to broaden the discussion. You know that I recently, just this evening, heard a report that said that even before the implementation, volumes are dropping in the first month of the year. And so if you don't get the volumes, you will not get the projected revenue. At the same time, you might have caused harm to the digital space. So I believe that maybe it's about time government looks at some of these expenditure items, and let's be able to cut the bull by the horn and be able to cut down on unnecessary expenditure. And I know that this government's position about the IMF is so clear from their first term. They wanted to exit the program at the time because they wanted to implement a lot of what we call expansionary fiscal policies, and then they did that. So the government itself will not be interested in going for a funded program. That is why these recommendations are very important for us to avoid going for a funded program, because we know our problems and we know the solutions to our problem. But the elephant in the room is politics.
Politics is the elephant in the room. On that note, we'll thank you for being a part of our deliberations tonight on ETV Fact Sheet. Several comments. Unfortunately, time is not our friend. I can see my beautiful ladies coming in for girl vibes, and so folks would have to forgive us. My guests tonight on the show have been Mr. Emmanuel Amwa Dakwa, economist and partner, CCAT Global, and then Professor Lord Mensah, who is Associate Professor, Department of Finance, University of Ghana Business School. They join me for us to try to have a conversation about the IMF option and whether it's something worth considering. Well, you can continue the conversation in your rooms, in your cars, maybe tomorrow in the office. But for now, we leave you in the capable hands of Mercy B and the beautiful girls as they bring you Girl Vibes. Good night.